The sun burned like fire over the prairie. The dry wind carried the smell of horses and gun oil as a hawk circled above the cracking ground. A woman was tied to a wooden fence, wrists swollen, lips cracked, eyes half open. Her dress hung in shreds, dust and sweat clinging to her skin. For a full day she had not eaten, not even had a sip of water. Flies gathered on the blood dried around the rope. Every breath came like a broken plea. Her name was Eliza Monroe. She had stopped screaming hours ago because no one had come. Now she whispered to the wind, her voice dry as sand. Spread it open. Do it with force. The words sounded desperate, strange, broken between gasps. She was not begging for shame. She was begging for someone to cut the rope, to end her suffering. The wind carried her voice across the empty hills until it reached a wagon creaking up the trail. A tall man sat at the reins, his hat pulled low, his face burned by years of hard sun. Jackson Hale, 48 years old, a rancher who had lost everything. His land, his cattle, his pride. The cabin ahead was supposed to be his fresh start, bought sight unseen from a seller in town who needed quick money. Jackson remembered the seller's warning back in town. Careful, Hale. Some folks around here don't take kindly to strangers buying land that isn't meant to be sold. He had laughed it off back then, brushing it aside like small talk over whiskey. But now, that uneasy look in the man's eyes came back to him. Maybe this valley wasn't as quiet as he thought. But what waited for him was not peace. When Jackson reached the cabin, the air shimmered with heat. He saw smoke rising from the chimney and thought someone was trespassing. Then he heard it, a faint cry from the fence line. Weak but human, he jumped down, boots hitting the dry earth. At first, he thought it was a trick of light, a shadow cast by the post. Then he saw her. Eliza, teeth, bleeding, barely breathing. Jackson's throat tightened. He pulled his knife and moved closer. Her eyes flicked open just enough to see him. Spread it open. Do it with force. Her voice cracked again. He froze, unsure, until he saw the rope cutting into her wrist. He sliced it clean. She collapsed into his arms, light as a ghost. As her body fell forward, her hands instinctively moved to her stomach, as if guarding something precious. Jackson caught the motion, though he didn't understand it yet. She whispered something faint, barely a breath. My baby has to live. Jackson froze, the knife still in his hand. Samuel's voice echoed in his head. Out here, you don't walk past someone in trouble, brother. Maybe that's why he couldn't leave her. But even then, she tried to stand. Her knees gave out. Yet she reached for the fence, refusing to stay down. Jackson caught her before she hit the dirt. There was something fierce behind those tired eyes. The kind of fire that doesn't die easy. Inside the cabin, he laid her on the floor, poured a few drops of water on her lips. He dipped a rag into the water bucket and laid it gently across her forehead. Her skin was burning, her breath shallow. Every time she stirred, she whispered something soft. Jackson sat beside her, listening to the flies outside. When she finally opened her eyes, she whispered, "Thank you. Who's coming back? Who did this to you?" "They'll find me. They always do." Jackson felt the hair rise on his neck. Ooh. The peace he wanted was gone, and as the wind carried the smell of smoke again from the hills, one question burned in his mind. Who was she really? When Eliza woke up, the cabin smelled of coffee and dust. Jackson sat by the table, hat off, a worried look in his eyes. He had cleaned her wounds, wrapped her wrists with torn cloth from his own shirt. The morning heat was already crawling through the cracks in the wall. Outside, the air shimmered like glass. She tried to sit up, still weak. "Where am I? Why did you help me?" Jackson poured her a cup of water, his voice low and steady. "You were tied up at my fence. I couldn't just ride by." She took the cup, her hands trembling as she drank. The water hit her throat like mercy itself. After a moment, she looked up at him. "Why'd you buy land out here? It's nothing but dust and heat." Jackson gave a small shrug, eyes fixed on the window. "Needed a place where the past couldn't find me." She gave a faint, bitter smile. "And me. I guess I was running from mine." The air between them went quiet, heavy but not cold. For the first time, they both understood. Sometimes you don't choose where you end up, only why you keep going. "They'll be back soon." "Who's they?" "Your folks. No, the kind of men who don't stop until they get what they want. Jackson glanced through the window. The trail below shimmered with heat, but something else caught his eye. A dust cloud. Riders. He stood fast, pulling his rifle from the wall. The wood creaked under his boots, the sound of metal on metal as he cocked the lever. Outside, the horses snorted, hooves scraping the dirt impatiently. Eliza's face went pale. Her breath quickened. They found me. Jackson peered through the curtain. 3 men on horseback moving straight for the cabin. The one in front rode tall, black beard, dark coat. The kind that spoke of trouble. Eliza's voice shook. His name is Malcolm Vane. He's the man who did this to me. Jackson's jaw clenched. The name sounded familiar, like a shadow from another life. He remembered the stories from town, about a land baron who made folks disappear when they refused to sell. And now that man was coming straight for his door. Jackson moved to the table. Loading shells one by one. You stay put. But Eliza grabbed his sleeve. Her eyes were glassy with fear. You can't fight him. You don't know what he's capable of. Jackson met her gaze. I've met his kind before. Outside, the horses stopped. Boots hit the dirt. Voices carried through the hot air. Come on out. Hale, we know you're in there. Jackson froze. They knew his name. He had never told it to her. He looked at Eliza. What did you tell him? Her eyes widened, panic flooding her face. I swear I didn't. But he always finds out. A heavy knock hit the door, then another. The sound rattled the walls. Malcolm's voice boomed through the heat. Eliza, you've made me chase you long enough. Come on out now before someone gets hurt. Jackson took a breath, his hand steady on the rifle. The air outside was still. If you open that door, she whispered, you'll never close it again. The door shook under another hit. Jackson tightened his grip. The door burst open. 3 men stepped in, dust swirling around their boots. The air in the cabin went still. Malcolm Vane filled the doorway like a storm cloud, eyes sharp, hand resting on his gun. Well now, he said slow, there's my runaway wife. Eliza froze, her hands clenched together. Jackson took 1 step forward, rifle low but ready. This is private property, he said calmly. Malcolm smiled, that kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Everything I touch is mine. That woman included. Jackson could feel the old anger rising in him, the same kind that had burned when he lost his ranch, his family, his brother. He kept his voice steady. The lady says she's not your wife. Malcolm's eyes darkened. The law says otherwise. Cowboy, one of Malcolm's men, a skinny fellow with a scar down his cheek. Moved closer, his hand near the pistol. Jackson didn't move, didn't blink. Something in his gut told him this was more than a domestic fight. This man reeked of cruelty. Malcolm took a slow step forward, eyes scanning the cabin. You know, Hale, he said softly. You remind me of someone, a rancher I once met up north. Stubborn old fool who thought land and honor were worth dying for. Jackson felt a chill. Samuel Hale. Malcolm continued, almost enjoying the sound. Yeah, that was his name. The world tilted. Jackson's brother, the same Samuel who had been found shot on a trail 6 months ago. The same trail near Malcolm's land. His breath came hard. What did you just say? Malcolm grinned. Guess he should have sold when he had the chance. Jackson's hand went to his revolver. But Malcolm raised his palm. Hold on now. Let's do this proper. He tossed his coat aside. You and me. 1 draw, 1 chance. You win. I walk away and I win. The woman comes home. Eliza stepped between them, her voice cracking. No, please, he'll kill you. Jackson's eyes never left Malcolm's. He already killed my brother. The 2 men walked outside. The sun hung heavy. Malcolm smiled, sure of victory. Jackson's grief turned to cold focus. This was about justice. The air turned heavy. Jackson could hear his own heartbeat, slow and steady. Malcolm's eyes narrowed, one corner of his mouth curling into a smirk. The wind died, the whole prairie holding its breath. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried, then silence. 1. Jackson's fingers twitched. 2. Sweat rolled down his cheek, stinging his cut lip. Their eyes locked. 2 men staring down the line between life and death. 3. Then came the flash, bright and final. The world exploded. If you've been listening this far, you might want to take a slow sip of tea and let your heart settle a bit. Go ahead, breathe. And before we move to the next part of the story, tell me something. What time is it right now, and where are you listening from? And hey, if you love stories of courage and justice out on the old frontier, hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss what happens next. The gunshot echoed across the dry field. Dust hung in the air like smoke after a wildfire. When it cleared, Malcolm Vane was on the ground, his gun half drawn, his pride bleeding out into the dirt. Jackson stood over him, chest heaving, the smell of gunpowder thick around him. For a long moment, no one spoke. The world went quiet. Eliza rushed from the cabin, tears streaking down her face. Jackson lowered his weapon. "It's over," he whispered. One of Malcolm's men yelled, grabbing for his gun. Before Jackson could turn, a single rifle shot cracked from behind. The man dropped, clutching his arm. Eliza stood in the doorway, the old rifle still smoking, but as Malcolm hit the ground, his eyes flicked open for one last moment, blood on his lips, but a cruel smile still there. "You think this ends with me, Hale? You don't even know who owns this valley." His blood mixed with the dust, but that wicked grin stayed. "They'll come for what's theirs." Then he went still, the wind carrying his last words into the dust. Her voice steady, her aim perfect. "The next shot won't miss." Jackson stared at her, amazed. The fragile woman he had found tied to his fence was gone. This one was fierce, calm, and ready to fight for her life. He walked to her, still catching his breath. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" She looked at the rifle, then back at him. "My father taught me, before everything went bad." Inside the cabin, she sat down slowly, her hands trembling again. Jackson poured her water, but she pushed it away, one hand pressing against her stomach. He froze, eyes narrowing. "You hurt." She shook her head, then, after a long pause, whispered, "I'm pregnant." The word hung heavy between them. Jackson blinked, unsure what to say. The realization hit him like a punch. All this time she hadn't just been running from a cruel husband. She was running to protect a child. Eliza's voice cracked as she continued. "It's not his baby. The man I loved died before he even knew. When Malcolm found out, he said the child would be his heir whether I wanted it or not. I had to get away. I had to keep my baby safe." Jackson stared into the fire. He understood. She wasn't running. She was protecting the last piece of love she had left. Outside, a horse neighed. Jackson looked through the window. Saw movement down the trail. Not more gunmen. This time, the glint of metal badges in the sun. Lawmen. Eliza gripped his arm, panic returning to her eyes. "They'll never believe me. They'll think I killed him." Jackson's heart pounded. He looked at her, then at the lifeless body of Malcolm in the dirt. And he realized the hardest part of this fight was just beginning. Because when the law arrives, truth doesn't always matter. The sun had started to set when the lawmen arrived. The air smelled of dust and smoke. Sheriff Morrison dismounted first, his eyes scanning the scene. The dead man, the woman holding a rifle, and Jackson standing quiet beside her. Morrison's eyes narrowed. "That's Malcolm Vane, ain't it?" The man had friends in high places. One of the deputies spoke up quick. "Sheriff, I saw the woman holding the rifle. She shot him." Eliza's hands tightened around the gun, but she didn't speak. Morrison turned to Jackson. "You a drifter, Hale, or one of his hired guns?" Jackson reached into his vest and pulled out the silver watch. "This belonged to my brother, Samuel Hale. Malcolm killed him. Look inside." Morrison flipped the watch open. Inside, the small folded map trembled in his fingers. He looked up at Jackson, his voice lower now. "You're Samuel's brother. I knew him. He was a good man. If what you're saying is true, I'll see this through myself." He listened to their story. He saw the bruises on Eliza's wrist, the papers proving the forced marriage, the silver watch from Jackson's brother. When he saw the map Samuel had hidden inside, his face changed. Justice finally had a shape. 3 days later, the sheriff's men uncovered a cave in the hills north of the cabin. Inside were documents, land deeds, and letters that told the truth about Malcolm Vane. He had been stealing water rights, threatening families, and murdering anyone who stood in his way. The law closed in on every man who had helped him. The court cleared